Hello, Grundy Center Schools. This is Julie Johnson from Heart and Solutions, and I'm just bringing you a quick pop-up video today about self-management and the impacts that attachment styles have on our abilities to manage ourselves and manage the things that we engage in and the things that we do on a daily basis. So I've been reading a lot about attachment styles, of course, like I always do, but I'm also in my doctorate program right now in behavioral health leadership. And when it comes to leadership, there's a lot in there that has to do with our ability to manage ourselves and be able to continue to do things that bring us closer and closer to our goals. The purpose of this presentation is really to bring a lot of that research that I've been doing lately together and hopefully to be able to create a link and an understanding for you guys about some of the ways that our various attachment styles, I know we talked about attachment styles at the beginning of the year, how that can really impact our ability to respond to our own self-management initiatives, and also the ways that your students' attachment styles may impact the ways that they respond to your support or the ways that you can respond to your students when you are helping them and supporting them in these self-management initiatives. Okay, so there's a couple concepts I want to just talk about quickly so that when we leave this discussion, hopefully you've kind of got an understanding of these kind of key terms that we use in this field. So the first is ego depletion versus vitality, and these are both states of being. This theory is used a lot in various different kinds of research when it comes to energy management. I know that I did a video on time blocking and also one on spoon theory. And spoon theory really fits in well with ego depletion versus vitality. So these are just kind of technical ways to say I'm feeling like I'm in a state of high energy and flow. Vitality is a state where the energy available to my self, the conscious self, is high. So I might be engaging in an activity that's contributing to my vitality. It might be something that, like writing, where I feel like the more that I do it, the more energy I have to be doing it, and it kind of snowballs in that way, versus ego depletion. So for me, sorry, math teachers, but like anything that has to do with math or statistics, when I'm doing research, statistics and data analysis, they are doable, but they definitely cause, in my case, a lot of ego depletion, which is a state where energy that's available to the self is low. The more energy that we have available to the self, the conscious self, the self that we're directing to do these things, the self that is like, I'm gonna make decisions that are gonna bring me closer to my goals or farther away from my goals. The self that's making the choice between, like, do I want to have an apple and oatmeal for breakfast, or do I want to have 3 donuts for breakfast, right? Um, the self that is choosing that requires a certain amount of energy level to be able to make those choices and make good choices. We talked in a previous pop-up about decision fatigue. This all kind of goes together. Decision fatigue and ego depletion are very, very well connected. And so when I say vitality, that state where our energy is available to us, I'm talking about that energy is high. Like we could continue to do that activity all day. I sometimes think about like flying kites. Like flying kites is, for a lot of people, like a vitality building activity because we could just do it all day long, right? But for some people, that might be an ego depleting activity. And so we might have lower energy available to us to take those steps towards what it is that we want to accomplish. So hopefully that is clear, kind of the difference between those two. And the way that it comes into self-management is that we only have, like in the spoon theory video, we only have a certain amount of self energy available to us every day to make decisions and also to execute on those decisions that we've made and follow through with them. What we want to do is create a state around us do things that create vitality in us, because when we do those things, it's much easier for us to direct ourselves towards the things that are going to get us the outcomes that we want. Whereas it's easier to eat that oatmeal for breakfast versus the ego depletion state. We want to try to do things like turn the things that cause that ego depletion state into things that are actually going to bring us vitality. And I'm going to talk about how we can do that. This is a state where that energy available is low. We've all had those mornings where like it just seems like too much energy to think about what to eat or to make a healthy choice, and then we're 3 donuts in, right? And we're like, how did this happen, right? So that's the difference between those two concepts. Another concept that I want to kind of talk about is self-regulation versus self-control. When we are trying to make active decisions for ourselves, if we're like, okay, so as a counselor, counselors deal with a lot of paperwork in their day. And we're typically not people who enjoy paperwork. We're typically people who enjoy other people. When it comes to writing notes, for example, and for teachers, it might be grading papers, or it might be any number of like unpleasant tasks, right? That drain our energy, that cause that ego depletion, right? So for me, writing notes and like paperwork, stuff like that is always kind of that way. Thing is that a lot of times we go in to those situations and we go, okay, I need to grade this stack of papers, right? I need to write this lesson plan. And I don't really want to. Like, it's not a vitality activity for me. It's an ego depletion activity for me. And so what we do is we try to power through it. And so we do self control a lot of times. And we say, okay, I'm going to manage my actions to be in line with the external expectations. Like, the expectation is that I would grade these papers within a certain amount of days and get them back to the students. And so I'm going to manage my actions to be in line with that external expectation. And what all of the research here from 2016 and forward into 2020 that I've been reading is saying is that self control, while it will work for a certain period of time, so I might be able to like power through 1 day's worth of notes, or I might be able to power through 1 day's worth of correcting papers. Self control is really only going to get me so far, because self control takes so much energy from me, and it doesn't recreate that energy. So it depletes it, but it doesn't renew that energy. And so what ends up happening is that I end up in a state of ego depletion, right? And that's really hard to get out of. And it's really hard if I know that every time I write notes or every time I grade papers, it causes me to go into ego depletion. I'm that much less likely to want to do it the next time, right? So we kind of get into this cycle when we try to use self control. What Martella and Ryan did was they kind of sectioned out, okay, what is the difference between self control and self regulation? And they characterize self regulation as managing one's actions to be in line with one's goals and purposes. So, this self regulation is a willing engagement, which leads to less ego depletion. What we're really aiming for when we're talking about self management, like effective long term self management, is we want to try for self regulation, which is that like willing, managing our actions, yes, but making sure that they're in line with our goals and our purposes. And when we're in self regulation, we're actually building vitality every time. So, for example, soccer, okay? Like, soccer is actually one of the examples they used in the article, which is that soccer can be extremely physically depleting. Like, it's very tiring to play soccer. But emotionally, really what it comes down to is whether it is depleting or whether it creates vitality for you, really depends on whether you are doing that using self control or you're using self regulation. For me, like personally, if I'm playing a game of soccer, it's going to be ego depleting for me. But that is because I'm going to be using self control to play soccer. So, in gym class, for example, the expectation is you are playing soccer. And even when I play with my daughter, like not necessarily playing for me, right? Like I'm playing for her because she wants to play soccer. So I'm using self control to manage my actions to like run after the ball and kick the ball. I'm using self control for that instead of self regulation because the act of playing soccer does not align with my goals and my purposes necessarily, right? And so if it did, I would be in self regulation and I would be getting vitality from it. But for me, soccer, my natural tendency is I'm using self control, which takes a lot of energy, which then gets me into ego depletion because I'm managing my actions to be in line with external expectations. I need to pass gym class. My daughter, really wants to play this and I want her to enjoy herself, right? External expectations versus self regulation is doing those things that are in line with our own goals and purposes. There are three factors that this study identified that allowed things to go from self control to self regulation and vice versa. So these are three factors kind of between the two. And the first one is autonomy. So the ability to choose for oneself, they showed that the more options the person had about whether or not they were going to play soccer, the more in the self regulation category and therefore the vitality category, those participants were, as opposed to not having the ability to choose, right? So the example would be autonomy. Okay, it's gym class and I can play soccer or I can play kickball or I can play hockey, right? So I've got some, or I can read a book, right? Like I've got some autonomy. If I pick soccer, then I'm more likely in that self regulation. Even if I'm not in love with soccer, the fact that I have the autonomy to choose it is going to bring me more into using self regulation because I'm managing my actions, kicking the ball, running after the ball, using my own goals and purposes because I made the choice to do it, which is going to lead me into a vitality state. It's going to increase my energy. When I don't have a choice, when it's like soccer or fail class, right? Or whatever it is, if the family's playing, right? And I don't want to be left out of the family kind of thing. Then I'm using self-control and my autonomy is lower in those situations. And I'm more likely to be in having to use self-control, which then depletes my energy or my ego. Autonomy is a really important factor. And that's great because a lot of times we're able to introduce autonomy into our own situations and also into the situations that our students may be in order to help them move from using self control, which is draining, to self regulation, which is invigorating. Competence, that's our level of perceived ability. So, competence means like how well are we able to do that thing? And in this study, they used it as perceived competence, not necessarily. So, if I think I'm an amazing soccer player, but I'm actually not, it doesn't matter if I'm actually an amazing soccer player, it's my perceived level. It's if I think that I am. Again, the higher the level of competence that the subjects reported, the more in line they were with self regulation versus self control, and the more vitality that that activity brought them versus if the participant reported low competence in that area, then they reported more ego depletion, which makes sense because, like, statistics, I do not feel good at. Like, I just feel like I'm not good at it. It's not my strength, and that's okay. But my competence level is low in that area. When I'm doing that, I really am doing it more for self. I'm using self control. I'm doing it more for those external expectations and requirements. And then relatedness was the last one. This is the level of connectedness to the task that the participant felt. If I feel like statistics are like, I actually have a fairly high level of relatedness with statistics when I'm doing research. And that's because I know I feel connected to that task because I feel connected to the identity of researcher. And I know how closely statistics play into that, right? That level of willingness, I guess, to do it. So my relatedness actually is pretty high with statistics, which brings me more into self-regulation than self-control. But if it's something else like, okay, computers, I'm not great at computers either. And my husband is really, really great at computers. And so there's so many times where I'll be like, Joe, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, and I just hand him the laptop, right? That's showing my level of relatedness. Like, I don't feel like it applies to me very closely. I feel like it more applies to him. It's that levelness of connectedness we have to the task. So, what's great about this study and this research is that we don't necessarily get to choose if we're using self regulation or if we're using self control. We definitely don't get to choose if we're going to be in vitality or in ego depletion, but we do get to work with these factors. Autonomy. We can give ourselves autonomy. So if I tell myself, like, I don't want to read this next chapter in my book for school, right? That's a real life example from this morning. If I say I don't want to read that, right? But I know I have to, I can give myself options just mentally. I can say, like, okay, I have to do that and I have to put away laundry. But while I put away laundry, I can watch Criminal Minds. So which one do I want to do first? And be able to give myself the choice. I might say, well, I want to read that chapter first because then I want to be free to relax while I put away the laundry and watch Criminal Minds. So I'm giving myself that autonomy that's going to move me towards self regulation and towards vitality with that task instead of being defaulting to self control and ego depletion. Competence. I can influence my level of competence with myself by allowing myself to look at past history and successes that I've had. And I can do that for clients too. And you can do it for students too. You can help them build their level of perceived ability by pointing to and highlighting similar situations in the past where they have been able to be successful at various pieces of that. So we can intentionally implement those things with ourselves and with other people to help us move into that vitality state. With autonomy, too, like we talk about, and I'm sure you guys do this all the time, right? Where we give selected options. So we say, in an assignment, yep, you can read and write a report on this, or you can paint a picture of it or record a movie of it, right? So we give that autonomy as well. And then relatedness. So this can sometimes just take some talking out loud about the situation and about how this might relate to your everyday life or to an identity that that student has. So you might be talking to a student about reading a novel that they're supposed to read for class, and there might be that resistance, right, where they have to use self-control, and self-control is really depleting and hard to maintain. But that might be because they don't see themselves as a reader. But then we can point to ways that they maybe are connected with that task because maybe they do read a lot, they just don't read that genre. Or maybe we can talk about one of the characters in that book and how that character might be similar in some way to that person or to somebody that student cares about. And those are really great ways to enhance our relatedness with the task itself. So hopefully ego depletion and vitality, hopefully that makes sense. It's why certain tasks, like when you guys went through and numbered your tasks for the day, 1 through 10, it's why certain ones were ones and certain ones were tens. They take a lot of energy. Those are ego depletion ones. If you're attracted to them because that seems like easy or fun, then those are vitality building tasks. They put you in that vitality state. Self regulation really brings us, because it's aligned with our goals and our purposes, we are willingly engaging in those lower number tasks and they take us less energy. They're easier to do. Self control is really, really difficult to maintain long term, but it is typically our go to with tasks that we don't like. But we don't always think about trying to intentionally change a task that we would have to use self control with and to try to change that to being able to use self regulation with that instead. So, how does all of it tie in with attachment styles that we talked about earlier? This is really cool. So, this really recent research is talking about how attachment styles from Bowen are linked with our ability to self manage because Attachment styles are characterized by our primary coping skills that were like our very, very first coping skills that we learned as children growing up. And so the secure attachment style, the lesson there, and I'm going to just bring up, I just put these slides on here. You'll recognize these from the previous training on attachment styles. This is the securely attached child. We see confidence, resilience. They're really good at like problem solving. This is the child who, if they don't understand the question, they're going to ask you, or if they, need help with or need an extended deadline, they're going to ask you if they can do that. And we just see them connecting with their peers and connecting with you really, really well. This is the securely attached child. And the securely attached child has secure attachments with the teacher and also feels secure with the task. Okay, so we remember this triangle here where there's security here between the teacher and the pupil and between the pupil and the task. These students have learned when they were younger growing up that they can trust the people around them, that they can trust themselves, that they can trust the people around them, right? And that they can be safe in attaching to other people and safe in attaching to tasks. So their primary coping has to do with attaching with other people. These are people who like, oh, I'm going to call my best friend because something happened in my day, right? So that's their primary coping is through attachment with others or asking for help through attachment with others. Avoidant attachment style. This is the one, like I said, this is me. So, avoidant attachment style, again, we see like the relationship between the teacher and the student is fractured, and the relationship between the pupil and the task is very strong. The avoidant attachment style person or student there is very task oriented. So we see that they may be very, very, there's a lot of potential with these students, but they may be very like withdrawn, and they may not accept comfort or help from the teacher. They may become angry with the teacher. What this article talked about with avoidant attachment style was that the main coping is through suppressing and then escaping. Okay, so to bring it back with secure attachment style, that coping of attaching with others, that is a vitality, energy available to self is high, coping style. And so it's a lot easier for students who have a secure attachment style to be able to stay in self regulation. They don't have to use as much control. So they're able to stay more in self regulation. They're able to be in that vitality state more often, which makes them more productive and better able to focus on tasks that they need to complete. So avoidant attachment style, because that main coping style is through suppression and then escape. The underlying message here with avoidant attachment style is I can't trust my caregivers. I can't trust the people around me. And so then there's that suppression. And then ultimately, like that suppression is really hard to do. That suppression is ego depleting. Suppressing those negative feelings, those negative thoughts, those negative experiences causes a lot of ego depletion. And then there's not energy left a lot of times for self management and for the things that are required for tasks. And so we do see really, really high potential, but then we see underachievement in tasks, and we're like, why? They're so task driven, right? So this can hopefully kind of help us to understand that a little bit more, is that there's like that suppression. So it might be a student who's like so quiet all day long. This was me in like elementary, middle, high school. So quiet, like doesn't really talk to the teacher, doesn't really talk to other kids, but then has an outburst out of nowhere, right? And it's like short lived, but like where did that come from? It's because of that coping through suppression just continues to build and builds and deplete the ego of energy. And then once that energy is gone, then the only other route to coping is escape. Right. And so this is a student who might like run out of the classroom, right? Or go sit in the corner and put their head down, right? So escaping. The insecure ambivalent attachment style, this one is the one that's characterized by high anxiety. This is the student who might have a really hard time. They're so focused on you, they're so focused on the teacher, they're so focused on their peers, and the relationships are so important. And they have to keep doing things to make sure that those relationships are secure and are okay, that they have a really hard time sometimes completing tasks and focusing on tasks because all of their energy is going to, am I okay? Are you okay? Am I okay? Are we okay with each other? Because they don't have that security in that. And so that can come off as constantly asking questions or like doing things to get their peers' attention and trying to, connect with peers even when it's not an appropriate time, especially if the task at hand or like the lesson is feels challenging to that student, then that can be even more pressure to try to find security in that moment of feeling uneasy because they feel disconnected and uneasy and insecure with the task, that they're going to try to feel more secure than by doing what does make them feel secure, which is getting that reassurance, right, from peers or reassurance from the adult. When we look at this ambivalent, insecure attachment style, what we see as that primary coping is coping through worry in an effort to figure things out. And so when we look at people with high anxiety levels, also me, but not because of attachment style stuff, but we see that the coping is like an attempt to be worrying, thinking, processing, overthinking every item and planning things out in an effort to figure things out so that they can minimize threat, right, and feel more secure. Again, this like constant worrying, constant thinking about things, constantly like checking in with a partner or a parent, like, are you still there? Do you still love me? Right? All of that constant checking is very, very, very ego depleting. It doesn't bring energy. It's like we have so little or such a finite amount, right, of self energy. And these kinds of like having to constantly check because we don't feel secure in our relationships around us causes us to be in ego depletion quite a lot, which then makes it more and more difficult to focus on tasks and complete tasks. So when we think about self management, it's like I tend to think about like getting myself to do the things that I know I should do, that I want the outcome for, but I have, we all have these challenges that kind of come up. So this is our attempt to kind of understand that stuff a little bit more in ourselves and in our students. So the last one is the insecure, disorganized attachment style. And this is coping through chaos. It's coping through distraction, right? Chaos. And finding that chaos can be frightening, but also can bring comfort for the disorganized attachment style student or adult. So really, this can be seen in really those hyper vigilant students where there is increased like distrust of authority. There may be violent or threatening behaviors happening, and also the relationship between the teacher and the student is fractured here, but also between the student and the task, because anything task oriented is seen as actually a threat for students with the disorganized attachment style. There are a lot of people who really thrive in routine and love that. If we've got a disorganized attachment style, that routine actually feels like a threat. It feels discomforting. And so then when we feel that threat or that discomfort, we go to our primary coping strategy, which is coping through chaos for this attachment style. So, of course, coping through chaos is hugely ego depleting. It takes so much energy to, one, if we don't know that we're creating the chaos around us, it's like we're always managing and coping with the chaos that's around us. And that is very ego depleting, but it keeps happening because we're kind of creating it because in a way it makes us feel safer to have that chaos around us. Hopefully, this makes sense on kind of how these different attachment styles really can make a difference in terms of how if we know our own attachment style, if we know the attachment style of our student, then we can help them see where maybe they may be or where we may be in self control mode, trying to manage expectations, external expectations, and where we can increase autonomy, competence, and relatedness for ourselves in that task or for our students in that task, and then try to move ourselves towards that vitality state instead of that ego depletion state. So then in the research, there was information on like, what do we do about this information now? What do we do with this? So the first one just has to do with empathy. Empathy is so important in counseling and in any situation where we're working with people, helping people to reach their goals. So students, helping students reach their educational goals. It is so important that we be able to have an understanding of our own motives and another person's. And if we can understand our own attachment style and how that might come into the relationship, and then if we can understand the other person's attachment style, help them to understand it, we can really have a lot more empathy towards that student. For example, let's say you've got a student who's like class clown, right? And you just can't get them to focus on an activity. You're like, literally, it's one worksheet. Like, this should take 10 minutes, and you've been working on it for like 40, right? And so that can be so frustrating when the idea is like this student is just being a pain, like they're just refusing to do this. But if we understand kind of their attachment style, if I go, okay, this student is really showing like poor concentration, attention seeking. They're supposed to be working on the worksheet, but they're like talking to other people and like texting on their phone and whatever it is, or like asking us about our weekend, just random things. Then we can kind of know that like, okay, maybe the student has an ambivalent attachment style, that insecure attachment style that's defined by anxiety. And so then we can go, okay, with this task, let's say it's a math worksheet. Does the student feel like they have any ability to choose for themselves, right? And if they don't, can we help them with that? So it's not a choice of like, you don't have to do it. Like at school, you have to do it. But like, can you start at the bottom? Can you do every other problem on the worksheet? Can you do a different worksheet first and then come back to this one, or do two on this one and two on the next worksheet and kind of switch that around? So that can be helpful. Just add that autonomy in that situation. Competence. So, sometimes just talking about our feelings of incompetence when it comes to different tasks when we're learning new things can really help that. And then we can help either ourselves or the student by bringing up examples of times that they were really competent in that situation. And then relatedness. So trying to relate that to real life ways that the subject of that worksheet could be helpful to that student in the future, and also ways that it can relate with their identity. One example from one of the articles, not this one that I was reading, but had to do with like football players and ballet and how there were certain activities that like young male students didn't want to do. And then they talked to them about and showed them like pro football players a lot of times will take ballet classes, and it changed the relatedness level that the students had with that task, and because they were able to connect that with something that they felt was an identity of theirs. And then that can bring us again into vitality. So hopefully, yeah, so understanding another person's attachment style and kind of understanding these pieces, we can kind of go through and try to work our way towards vitality. Exposure and practice, if we understand where others are coming from, we can help them to practice. So if your student or if you have a secure attachment style, you can help them to help other people to form secure attachments by modeling it. Sharing feelings is a huge one for students with the avoidant attachment style. Anything that you can do, small steps that help them to identify feelings and share those feelings with you. One of the best ways in counseling is that we identify emotions that are not verbally expressed. So if a student appears withdrawn and quiet and you go, oh, I noticed that you did all of the questions on this part and then you did none of the questions on this part, right? I noticed that. What is that difference, right? Just being able to see that, and be able to say, like, I wonder if you're feeling a little bit more nervous about these types of questions than these ones on the worksheet, right? Or this skill versus this skill. Being able to say those things and kind of taking those baby steps towards them being able to share feelings and trust somebody else can be really, really helpful to being able to bring them to that state of vitality. And then sharing worries also is another way for the ambivalent attachment style, that like anxiety surrounded attachment style. Sharing worries with other people actually takes some of that ego depletion off of the participant and brings them more or allows them to be more in that flow vitality state, because it takes so much energy to like have those worries and keep them within ourselves. It takes way more energy to do that than if we share those worries with other people, and it takes way more energy to suppress our like negative feelings if we're in that avoidant attachment style. Suppressing all those negative feelings and not sharing them with other people around us because we don't trust them, like that takes so much energy from ourselves that we want to be able to use that energy towards completing, the tasks that we want and achieving our goals. And then building trust in ourselves and others. If you've got a student with that disorganized attachment style, taking steps to help them build trust in themselves is going to be even more important than having them build trust in you specifically. So again, just highlighting the things that they have done well is so, so effective with that, because it can't be argued with too. Like a disorganized attachment style grown up or student, like it's going to be harder for them to trust that you're telling them the truth. But if you, instead of saying like, oh, you're good at math, and they're going to be like, no, I'm not. Why are you saying that? What's your game? But if you say, like, you did really well on this activity, you can't really argue that, right? So, using those specific examples can be really, really helpful in the practice and exposure intervention. And then the third one is that when we're struggling with self management ourselves, if we're trying to help somebody else to complete requirements, identifying if we're trying to use self regulation or self control. We can identify that by like, how do I feel? What number is that on my spoon theory chart? And then how do I make those, if I've got activities that are like an 8, like writing notes, if I've got activities that are an 8, like writing notes, and they like are draining, right? Like I just feel like ego depletion, energy depletion when I do those things. I can move those towards here. I can give myself more autonomy, more competence, more relatedness to that activity, which is then going to move me into self regulation, because it's my own goals and purposes now that are driving me to do that instead of self control. And then I'm going to be more in that vitality state. I'm going to have more energy to do it and to do other things and to make better decisions for myself. So, as always, please refer out if like you don't have to be that person's therapist. There were a lot of kind of techniques that I talked about that are really, really helpful when everybody in that child's community is taking those steps, kind of building an understanding of these things. But if you feel like that student could benefit from additional services, like somebody to talk to once a week about these things specifically, and really going into those attachment styles and like the formation of those attachment styles, then please refer out. So, just like with concentrated lemonade, if we add too much water, it gets really sour and gross. So, don't add too much water to your plate with your students, your relationship with your students. I know you guys have to focus on teaching, and that really should be the most concentrated part. So, Heart and Solutions, we are here to work with students on those therapeutic interventions. So here's our contact information. So we are in Grundy Center at 626 G Avenue across from the Hallmark store. So give us a call, send us an email, or you can find us on Facebook. And it's really easy to refer a student. You can just give us that student's information or that parent's information, and we'll call them and we'll talk about what the services are that we can offer them and how insurance works and all of that. You guys don't need to go into all of that with them. If you're not comfortable, you can send them right to us. If we can't work with them, we will refer them to somebody who can. So we will take care of all of that. So this is our references. Again, I really hope that this was helpful to you guys, and I hope you have a really great and safe holiday. Thanks. Bye.